Hey everybody, welcome to week 4, focusing on group analytic group theory. This group theory is kind of interesting in that I probably for the last couple of years didn't realize that it was actually different than modern analytic therapy. And to be clear, there is a lot of crossover in concepts and in the ways in which they approach it, but some differences that I think I'll try to illuminate in here between the interpersonal frames or modern analytic frames, but you wouldn't be wrong to confuse the two at times because they do approach different concepts, transference, the use of countertransference, and other topics with some similar approaches to modern analytic. So as we've talked about before, this is the overview where we're going to talk about some brief concepts, inception of the theory, some differences in interventions, group leader traits, and some core change factors, while trying to do it through a social justice anti-racist frame throughout the content. And the two main books that I used for this are From the Couch to the Circle and Group Analytic Psychotherapy, A Meeting of Minds. As I was reading towards the end of both of the books, they both mention this other author, Farhad Dalal, and talk about his reframe or kind of reimagining of group analysis through a more socio-cultural context or reframe, at least as far as I understand it, as they quote him in their books. His book, Taking the Group Seriously, I just purchased, and so I plan to read it and take a look at it. I wish I had had enough time to delve into it fully. This is the problem with this theory, is it's so large in scope and there's so much that you could talk about with it that I felt like throughout the entire weekend that I needed to learn more and to understand more about it. So that's definitely not going to end in today, but hopefully this can be a good brief primer and again pique interest for people rather than feeling like the comprehensive approach to the theory, which I would say From the Couch to the Circle certainly is probably the most comprehensive overview of the theory and connects it to a lot of other group theories, which is really nice for that compare contrast. And it has a plethora of vignettes to put it into practical applications. Whereas the group analytic psychotherapy, I think, was much easier to read through and understand, less technical, I would imagine, in its overview. But still got a lot of the good main concepts and used a lot of vignettes kind of taking you through the different aspects of the group life and different complications that can happen along the way. So as I mentioned each time, the socio-cultural transference and context that I'm trying to highlight here is that group theories, like most things, were based in a Eurocentric white frame of mind and have a lack of intentionality when it comes to using it with specific sociocultural dynamics. And so trying to approach these theories and these interventions with the aspect of asking yourself, well, if I do this intervention or if I use this frame, depending on the identifications of my group members and myself, my own stimulus value, what might I be recapitulating in this moment? So I'll try and use some examples and use my frame of reference to assist with that. But if you see any problems or missed opportunities or microaggressions within the comments that I make, please don't hesitate to email and just let me know so I can continue to grow in that. So I'm trying to do this too long, didn't watch summary, so that within the first 5 minutes or so you can get the main gist of the content for group analytic for time's sake. Essentially, some things that are really broken down very simply from a group leader perspective. You're responsible for the structure, meaning the structure and frame of the group, the time, the place, the location. They really highlight the importance of keeping that solid frame for the group's own security and well-being, which I can attest to can certainly make it feel a lot more chaotic if you don't have a set location or time. You're in charge of the process of the group and as well as the content that's shared. And when I say you're in charge, they call the group leader a conductor in this space. So in essence, it doesn't mean that you're intentionally leading the group. You're more following and actually kind of dipping in and out of the group process. The leader, the conductor, in group analytic will naturally shift between roles as the convener of the group that will be the one taking care of the chairs and setting up the environment when we were back in physical space, as well as focusing on helping people in being able to provide his own emotional reactions as like a member to the group in some sense, and then shifting back to a interpreter assisting group members, like leaning them into interpreter, translate the there and then stories to the here and now. So a lot of it's focused on having free-floating discussion and having the group get into a discourse of sorts so that there's at least 3 people kind of engaged in that process, locating some preoccupations that may be happening within the dialogue or the discourse, translating hidden issues in that common or conscious language that's being talked about, the specific theme, interpreting it to increase the cohesion of meaning towards members and their interconnectedness towards this specific theme, and that kind of leading to more of the unity. So the group is seen as the curative factor in this space, again, as a conductor with an orchestra. Like, nobody is in isolation, they all kind of tune to one another, and your goal is to help them like get into sync in this process. There's different aspects where we obviously have the relational like aspect where we're relating to our own like experiences in our own world and the there and then processes of our life. And we become more reflective on how this comes into the room and the transferences and aspects of how these patterns reappear within the group, these patterns from our past like behaviors interpersonally, as well as being able to repair experiences. And so ruptures and harm are kind of a known like piece within group work. And so they really take it from the sense of wanting there to be a reparative experience where you can acknowledge and honor the impact that you've had and be able to like use that as a way to move forward with goodwill to address that pain that you've caused or make reparations for that pain with either that member or another member in the future. Which again, like I think in its conceptual theoretical form is actually a really wonderful social justice frame that can sometimes be lost with our own lack of consciousness around how that looks. What we're really wanting to do is help people resonate with each other's emotional experiences who want to amplify certain emotional experiences within the group and condense. When they say condenser, it's speaking more, they use dream talk a lot in this. They really invite people to speak to their dreams and to condense like the symbolic image of a dream that's taking place into a specific moment that can be used to generate this intersubjective experience. So I'll say like an example that I'll talk about later again would be like dirty laundry, like on the bed. If somebody had a dream where there were just piles of laundry everywhere on their bed, in their closet, in their bathroom, then the laundry might become the symbolic image of what's a shameful hidden experience that we all deal with, that we all like don't want to deal with our laundry or don't want to have to put things away and move on. And so we let it sit, we let it clutter, let it build over time. And that's not to say that that's like the one interpretation, but that there could be multiple people interpreting what that symbolic image means to them and kind of connecting with that in different respects. So the idea again that they will kind of say is like locating like where the dialogue is, translating the there and then location or the themes into the here and now, and identifying, helping people identify with that to increase cohesion and understanding among members. And these mutative metaphors, this primordial and symbolic register, they talk about that again, kind of in this Jungian sense of the collective unconscious, in that there are metaphors or things beyond words that we can all like resonate with, maybe archetypes or symbols that can help us towards integrating and changing. So piled up laundry on a bed like has a lot of meaning for different people, and so using that as a way to integrate people's beliefs or views of the topics, or being able to see each other through this symbolic representation rather than just through words or story narratives can be really helpful towards the change process. And that becomes a common theme, like in each of these sessions. There's kind of like a general, to me, it feels like a theme or something that we're wanting to have the group as a whole be able to work towards understanding or gaining more cohesion with. And then as a therapist, as a conductor, you're kind of asking yourself who's talking at this time, listening to what people are saying, as well as what's the message behind what's being said, as well as what's not being said by the group members. So trying to unpack some unconscious anxieties or defenses around longing for maybe attachment, longing for like being cared for, understood, and finding belonging like within the group sphere, within different relationships that are represented within the group's transferences. And so, yeah, that's the basic overview. And again, there's a lot that you could go into in this theory, but hopefully that gives a general picture for the three interpersonal dimensions, again, that I mentioned before. The relational dimension, that's focusing on people's subjective relationships with one another and changes to that within the group process. The reflective dimension is when we self-examine, we ask people reflective questions and have them focus on the discovery of like symbolic meanings to them. So think of that as like, in my mind, I'm viewing it as like interpersonal questions when you're asking them like, how are you feeling about that? Or what does that represent to you, like in this dream or in the story? The reparative dimension is again like more of when there's conflict or ruptures, the trying to highlight or attune to the experiences of concern, guilt, remorse, and wish to make good. They speak of it as like a pay love forward, meaning that, you know, again, I can kind of equate this to the Buddhist philosophy of you're taking the garbage moments of ruptures or you know, suffering that you have and turning that garbage into fertilizer for future growth, which I think is a good concept to keep in mind as, you know, we talk about discourse on race or microaggressions. There's sometimes a desire for things to be repaired, for there to be a sense of resolution. And as a white identified like leader, I know in one of my most recent groups, I had a member bring back up a microaggression I had done months ago to them, and just feeling some frustration and like defensiveness around a phrase that I had used or something that they weren't quite sure what I was alluding to, and you know, kind of brought that back up, that this was coming back into their mind. And I think that that's okay. You know, we don't need to get fixated on this idea of resolution, you know, so much as working towards owning that experience that we've done and working towards amending and repairing that moving forward. Because I think with any microaggression that happens within the space, whether it's by me or by another member, you kind of hold into mind, like, okay, if I'm feeling the guilt, if I'm feeling concern and remorse, it's not about doing it with this person, because these opportunities will happen an immense amount of times throughout my career. And so every other client, every other person that I come into contact with that shares that identity or shares that marginalized like status within the power of like the white supremacist culture, that's another opportunity for me to pay that love forward, you know, to hold that person's pain in my heart and say like, okay, I'm going to work towards being more attuned to me being extra critical like with this person, and like wanting to be mindful of reining that in, to not you know, make a pointed comment or make an allusion to some stereotype. So just keeping that in mind, I think that again, like it sounds really nice with the way that they frame it, and I think these all have possibilities here to be used in productive ways, these theories. But the idea of mutated metaphors, again, I think it's kind of getting back to this idea of like, what are we really talking about here? And this did happen actually in one of my groups in the last couple of weeks, where one of the group members highlighted that, you know, we're on Zoom. So she had something in her background and said like, oh, my laundry is on the bed, just ignore that, it's fine. And she made some comment about it being embarrassing. And then another male member turned around and looked at his bed and he said, well, do you see like that lumpy covers on my bed? I mean, that's just to let you know, you're not alone in that. That's like my stuff underneath that. And some other members shared their like clutter behind them, their laundry. And that became, something of a discussion point or a theme, which we were talking about, like how is this like a metaphor for what we're feeling like we need to hide? Because everybody in the group admitted the frustration of like folding laundry and not wanting to deal with it. And, that we kind of brought that into and saying like, well, what are we not wanting to fold in here? Like what kinds of laundry are we trying to hide from each other in the space right now? So again, it was bringing that like concern into the here and now. And it was a very interesting and like fascinating way to, I think, use that metaphor to an advantage instead of just taking it as a throwaway comment and moment, in group, which I really think can be helpful or very cool to do. Another interesting metaphor that I found within the groups that I've run is this idea of throwing a party, which for a certain group in private practice, they had made a fantasy about having a party if they were together in person because they've never met together in person, and started fantasizing about if we were at a party, where would each of us be? And this happened to take place where a new member was introduced to the group. And so each of them was talking about their roles, if they'd be in the center of the dance floor, if they'd be on the side, taking drinks, helping out with giving appetizers and hors d'oeuvres to people, or if they would be outside, like near their car, waiting for the party to end, saying that they were, just there to help drive somebody or be the designated driver. It started to help people relate and connect with each other in various ways that they hadn't really expected it. And there became a lot of like energy and curiosity around like, why are you at the car? Like if I was there, I would not let you be at the car. I'd be going over to you and talking to you. And like, I'm asking you like these questions. And, we kind of tried to make it more centered into like, what would you want to talk to them about right now? Like in this space, like, kind of assuming this party is happening right now in this group. And there was a lot of really meaningful moments. The new member was totally flabbergasted by this because we'd never done that before, and seemingly was very confused as like, this is their first frame of reference for what group could be. However, like after several months of that newer member being in group, another member came into group and they did the same thing, not prompted by anybody, but like had gone back to that party metaphor and started like talking to, the group makeup had maybe shifted a little bit, started talking about what they would be doing and where they would be at this party now. And it brought up into this idea of like, so what is this, this party metaphor is something where it's like that group is really wanting to welcome this new person in and kind of be with them in this kind of joy and lightheartedness of the group. And what is not being spoken to is maybe the emotional like heaviness of the group process, right? The suffering. It's like trying to hide that and having it feel like, what, at the end of the day, this is all just a good time. So being able to, again, to speak to what does it represent and what is being left out, I think is a cool way of thinking about these processes. So the four, whoops, a little slow there. Just thinking about it. There we go. 4 levels of communication within this that they'll speak to. Foulkes kind of like highlights the current, transference, projective, and primordial archaic, which, again, the current, simply speaking, discussion of current events, kind of normal associations. The transference, which is something we all do all the time, essentially when we connect to group members or the conductor, and they represent people within our family systems or significant members in our lives or parts of ourselves, I would say, like our past or present selves. So remember, when we talk to somebody, we're not talking to them because we don't really know them. We know everything that they've shown us, and then all of our cut and pasted images of people in our lives that semi-resemble them, whether it's their personality style or speech patterns or looks, what we fantasize about them. And so transference being a normal phenomenon. And one of the key things that was found, kind of like they described it as penicillin was accidentally discovered, transference was accidentally discovered as something that's like one of the biggest and most useful tools in group analysis and in group therapy, I think in general, because it wasn't seen that way at first. Freud was thinking of it as something that got in the way of progress, and Foulkes and others like really highlighted it as the way to bring the transferential, like past there and then experiences and replay them into the here and now, and address those transferences through the representations of the group members for those past people or parts of self. So projective identification and projections, like in that way, can reflect more the unconscious parts of the self and push them into others within the group. So if there's a part of you that maybe feels selfish and you don't want to like hold on to that emotion, then you like, you know, make a statement or act in such a way to recruit someone to like own that selfishness, or you assume that this person is also like really selfish and cares about no one but themselves. But that again, like if there's anger towards an aspect of somebody else in group, then a good thought or question can be like, well, how does that maybe represent a rejected part of this person, right? Like, can we be curious about if they see that part of them in themselves or in somebody that they detest? Like I know for me, selfishness relates to, you know, some of my own parental like figures. And so I can think about like, oh, I don't like being seen as selfish because I viewed someone significant in my life as very selfish or self-focused. And so if I'm seen that way, it's really hard for me to tolerate, and I'll maybe want to push that into others and reject the notion of that in myself. Equating against selfish with bad, and working in group can kind of have that association, that binary like association of the affect state as something that's more gray, right? Instead of taking it as an all or nothing, good or bad, like dichotomy. And the last thing, the primordial archaic, again, that's more, like I mentioned, the symbols, the collective unconscious, and really can be used for anything. So I think like the party, the laundry, other kinds of symbols or images that come up into the dialogue, or with dreams specifically, because again, they use a lot of dreams to analyze or invite that into the discussion or discourse. Again, these levels of communication, not hierarchical, very fluid. You'll go through each of them at different points. So just using that as a way to understand the group process rather than prescribe what you need to do for it to go well. Transference, again, that key part of the frame that I mentioned, taking the shadows cast in the group by the members' history. Like, so I like that as a nice metaphor for what it represents. And the idea is to translate what the symptom is that somebody's coming in with, like, and put that into meaning, right? If somebody's saying that they're depressed or anxious, wanting to understand like what in their there and then experience is leading to that symptom being created. I think in the second book that I had mentioned, the Group Analytic Psychotherapy, A Meeting of Minds, they highlight this a little better and more clearly, that this is, you know, something that's group analysis has from the medical model, like leftover, that are focused on illness and the individual, as opposed to the system around them that created that symptom. So I like that idea, again, from the space of working from this self-induced blame of I'm depressed, that's the problem. I'm anxious, that's the problem, and giving it context so that you can unpack what that defense is, make that more conscious. And by defense, I would say adaptation. Like, you know, to be anxious socially is not in and of itself a problem, but an adaptation to past experiences in which you've known, if I'm vulnerable, I'm not going to be okay, I'm going to be harmed or left out, you know, rejected, and now I've adapted by being anxious of approaching those catastrophic situations that have occurred to me in the past. The regression of transference encouraged passive approach. Yeah, so in Transference, they really try and highlight as a leader, as a conductor, you're not trying to dismiss or diminish the transference, you're kind of trying to enhance it or encourage it. So kind of passively, not as engaged as a leader to allow this fully established transference neurosis. And that can, help transition into highlighting a problem of dependence or fixation on the psychoanalyst. I can see where, from this theoretical lens, having that play out and not being quick to diminish it could be something that's helpful, but I would worry about this being used in a way that, let's say, again, as a white leader, you're, you have a person of color in the group who's been the victim of microaggressions and racism, and you don't make it a clear point at your pre-group appointment or even in the group session so far that you have a consciousness around racial disparities or racism like as being a systemic like problem, then people will project like things onto you, and understandably so, right? Like silence often can potentially mean a lack of consciousness that this even exists in this person's life. And so to not like address that or to let that be played into, I think can have like very strong consequences to the members' feeling of safety, and not be something that's resolved by addressing it later, right? Because then it could become like maybe a false sense of security. So just to kind of be conscious of like what we're allowing to transfer and how can we like set a stage so that there's that cohesion and trust within the group leader before delving into these transferences. Again, like I think in my example, I make it pretty clear in my groups that this is something on my conscious mind, and with the member, the Black woman who had previously mentioned that I'd said something like racist or done a microaggression to her, which was pretty clear and blatant. It was questioned like in that way of like, what did you mean by that? Why did you say that thing by her in kind of a playful like manner? And I was able to say like, oh well, that's the racist part of me, I think, coming out. That's that representation of white supremacy. So I'm sad that I said that. And I recognize now that, there was a playfulness or a kind of lightheartedness to the way that you talked about it. And it's making me concerned that maybe you're holding on to some anger because I'm the leader. I'm supposed to be a little more like maybe educated or not be as susceptible to this in people's mind. And I just wonder what that's like for you to hear me like play into that stereotype. And that, again, I think gave a little bit of permission for there to be exploration of the anger and the affect, and kind of highlighted my acknowledgement of the impact while engaging the person to be more curious about like what happened to them that made them go with that lighthearted approach to addressing it, and highlighting the frustration of needing to approach dialogues like that in a certain way, not being able to own anger because then they'll be dismissed or defensive, and led to a very rich discussion because of it. So yeah, but they don't want to manipulate the transference situation as a group analyst, and really want to emphasize more the insight to contrast the there and then from the here and now, with again the group doing some of those interpretations as well, rather than the leader. So process dynamics that they list, again, they list a ton. Like mirroring has its own like gigantic list. So I'm not going to cover all of those, but just know that there's things that they speak to as like key dynamics that happen in small group therapy. Resonance, so being able to resonate with core emotional processes with one another in the group. Of course, that's something you want to be asking, like how are people resonating with this emotion of like despair, sadness, or love? Like what does this mean for people's intersubjective lives with the group, and trying to help them like connect on those emotional undercurrents. Reciprocity, like of exchange between people, and that can be both pleasant and unpleasant reciprocity. mirroring, so resonating with others' experiences, and that can help reflect the known or denied truth about the self. There's a lot of instances in group in which people will have the same adaptations or defenses, where people from difficult family systems or coming from marginalized identities can be able to connect on this experience of oppression or being seen as insignificant if they voice anything like related to discontent or anger, like, silence is the way to stay safe in that. And so being able to have people mirror, and it's really wonderful to see like people go to bat and go to really like defend the other, like when they start self-attacking because they see a part of themselves in that person. And it's kind of like what they want to do for themselves, which they can't, they'll do for someone else with that same defense. And being able to draw that mirroring and parallel process to them, I think that can continue to have them challenge this idea of, if I don't think this person deserves it, and this person like parallels my life in a lot of ways, then what is it about me that makes me deserve it, right? Is this actually me, or is this like something that I've just been told? I forget exactly where I heard this now. It's not coming to me at this very moment, but there was a really nice way of framing this idea of like the inner voice. And somebody had mentioned like the idea of saying, if you hear this inner critic, this self-critical voice, you're the one hearing it, and who's saying it to you, right? And so this idea again of depersonalizing this, it's not a self-attack, because we don't attack ourselves. Systems attack us, and we internalize and repeat it. And it sounds like us because we're repeating it in our voice, but it's not from us. And so I think that's just another like helpful way of continuing to reinforce the ways in which people can push against those narrative beliefs in themselves. The condenser, again, is like more condensing the meaning or association within a dream or dialogue into a singular symbolic image, and then amplifying, reinforcing the range or intensity of an emotional experience. And I think, even in terms of like just giving permission for people to exaggerate their emotions, like you as a leader or as a conductor can do, something that feels like authentic to you. Like as a member, I could be really aggravated and pissed off at somebody's like history of abuse, that they've been treated that way. And they may say that they're, it's a little annoying, and I may jump in and say like, I feel incredibly frustrated right now. Like that anything like that could happen to someone like you, like that you could be treated that way and that be at all acceptable, like that gives more amplification to the affect and raising my tone and voice. But again, like, knowing my stimulus value as a white male and being like angry in that way can have certain connotations depending on the different identities that I'm working with. So just being mindful of what like that will do for you to amplify that. But I think the hope also, like as a conductor, is you can use other members similar to the bridging and modern analytic to help amplify that. If you see somebody who has a similar past, or you just see somebody like violently shaking their head no as they're hearing this dramatic like narrative from someone else, then they can be that chorus of anger for that person and really, reinforce and empower them through what they wouldn't be able to express on their own. So again, as a conductor, you're wanting to maintain the structure, have this open facilitation. Sometimes you guide it. Oftentimes you help the group members interpret it. You also have the choice of not responding immediately and seeing how things unfold, and jumping into action if the discourse becomes more of that like, content. Why did you do this? Asking questions without any kind of like purposefulness to it. Being able to model yourself as a group member, I think, can help with that, because you can jump in. And self-disclosing. They say not to disclose content of your life, like that you're more disclosing like your affect towards the situation. But I had something like in a group recently where a member had, a white woman had mentioned that she was feeling concerned about the tone that I had used with her situation in a relationship, and seeing it as judgy. And she's asking me like, cool, what do you feel about it? Like, what do you think? And so I said like, well, if I was client Vinny, like in this, then I would say that it connects with my fear of my own relationship, being able to, stay healthy and, not wanting it to degrade to more distance and more separation. And so I think I'm feeling a lot of fear for that. And if that's coming across in my dialogue, then I feel like that's more about me. And that is that it's bringing up a lot of anxiety. And it makes me really sad to think of that future for my relationship that I'm seeing you in right now. And so that, was very validating for the person to hear, as well as like normalizing, taking my power down in that sense, which I think, can be helpful, like in dosed increments, because you are human, you do have your own reactions. And somebody is, you hear stories about group leaders and conductors who somebody will say something frustrating, like accusing of the group leader, and they'll push back and say like, well, that's your shit, or that's your projections. And I think that's very much missing an opportunity to be able to be curious and reflect this culture of inquiry that group analysis is also trying to promote, by being able to vacillate between like, well, how could I be playing into this misogyny or this, racist notion? How could I be like open to hearing if other people are also viewing this, and almost like really encouraging them to join that person's frustration at me, rather than trying to get people to defend me, or saying like, like, oh well, that was my intention. Again, I think we can do a lot by showing that humility and being a human in the space that can make mistakes and grow from it. Yeah. So some 6 questions on language of the group: who's talking, who are they talking to, what's the message, what are they talking about, what's not being said, should we intervene in any of these like areas, and if we should, what's the optimal intervention? There's a lot of really great like information and charts on like different ways to intervene. And they talk about, again, the challenges for the conductor is you wanting to promote the narrative and different encounters with group members, develop that culture of inquiry, like I mentioned, for thematic development and narrative development. You help kind of crystallize the theme, the thematic development with group as a whole, observations based on the dialogue that's taking place, the discourse. And you bring the modalities of time and place so that you can help transition us from that past there and then to this here and now present experience of the group, and listen to the voice of the symbol, educate the group members in how they can hear it too. So again, like it's kind of an art in a lot of ways, not a hard science. It's really difficult for me to like give concrete, like exact skills. But I hope that through some of the examples I've given, that could be a positive assistance. Again, this idea of like the structure, the process, the content analysis, interpretation are like the main like roles of the group analytic conductor. So the structure is like the selection of the group members, the setting the boundaries, the process is the free floating discussion, having people resonate, give mirroring, amplification, valency, condensation, locate what preoccupations or conflicts there are, and make that unconscious language or anxieties that people might feel into that conscious present experiences. And then for the analysis and interpretation, you want to be able to hold, contain like different affectual experience, be able to reflect that, analyze what transference, and be curious with people about what transferences might be occurring within the space to one another, using and interpreting your own countertransference, like I had mentioned before, with maybe being a little more critical or fearful in my response to that member who's talking about relationship difficulties, and using the mutative use of metaphor and allegory to be able to like highlight those themes. So some differences between the group analytic and interpersonal frame. They both are like lower in leader activity and have non-specific like kind of therapeutic goals, more opaque than transparent, like which can lead to more frustration from group members, maybe than gratification at different times. But there's a balance of the there and then and here and now. And again, that shifting from the conductor's role, I think, is one of the key features, as well as emphasizing how each member is a voice for the group as a whole. And so again, like if one person's saying something, discontent, anxiety, anger, then there's something larger being spoken to within the group that can be brought to the attention of everyone and seeing how they relate to that experience. So focused on interpreting and understanding the domains of meaning, like we talked about before in those different transference, primordial, or projections. And lastly is this idea of longing and belonging, which they talk about, again, focus on the narrative, but also focusing on where are the gaps or the silences in the group's discourse, what's missing or not being talked about, to highlight some hidden anxiety, defenses, and themes. And they list what some of those could be. Not comprehensive. There can be infinite amounts, I'm sure. But the ideas of absence of meaning, like within myself, absence of a self within another person, or a fear of being seen by others in the group, a fear of never being found, never being able to be loved or connected with by others, never being seen as acceptable by others. There's certainly parts of that that I think you can like recognize how that longing and belonging can be representative of the familial pattern or the cultural, again, racist or like oppressive system that's being reinforced internally with the person, like that introjection. And so being able to use group analysis or group therapy, I think broadly, like can be an amazingly corrective recapitulation of experiences if you're cognizant enough to not like recapitulate those past traumas. So it's being cognizant of that process. And yeah, hope that was a helpful, like brief overview of group analytic for you all, and look forward to any comments or thoughts you have on how to improve this for the future.